We're here with Chris Matthews, host of Hardball, host of the Chris Matthews Show, MSNBC, and a new book on President John Kennedy. Why'd you write it, Chris?
Well, I had written a book called Kennedy and Nixon about the rivalry and the friendship earlier on, and I wanted to just get to the question of who he was. I always found him the most fascinating politician, and I wanted to know what he was like as a guy. And everybody's written about his presidency and all that and his political career, but I wanted to know what he was like in school, what he was like to be in the room with, what he was like in the Navy out in the middle of the South Pacific when there's just a couple of guys around. And I wanted to know how he grew into being this guy who could get us through the Cuban Missile Crisis, and how he really formed himself, this rich kid who became the hero of the country and really did helped us avoid a nuclear war. He really was an amazing hero for our country. And I also think we need heroes, especially now. But I really got to the truth. I was very fortunate to get Kenny O'Donnell, his top political guy's oral history of every event that went on from 1952 on in the back room, all the politics. And I was able to get the information from Choate School, where the original phrase "ask not" came from his headmaster up there. And also got Theodore White's actual script notes, or notes from the interview he did with Jackie Kennedy right after Jack was killed. And I found Jack's beginnings of his biography. He was beginning to write his memoirs. He was dictating them. I found a diary he kept back in 1945 and 46 when he was first going into politics. So I was able to find a lot of his firsthand, stories about himself. So I was really able to do the work.
Obviously, you talk a lot about your role as a kid in the Peace Corps.
Well, yeah,
Obviously,
it came. I think a lot of us who are in the Peace Corps, there's a couple 100,000 of us who've been in the Peace Corps overseas. You're out there all alone in the middle of nowhere with the snakes and the local people, trying to learn the foreign language and living with poor people. And I think there's a hell of an investment there. Every Peace Corps person I know, man or woman, says it was a life changer. And I think we all owe it to Kennedy, because he really came up with that unique service.
As we walk here, the thing that I find is really interesting is, having grown up in Massachusetts, a Catholic, like yourself, the name Kennedy and the name JFK was one in which it's just all about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, all about
it's a
New
great
England.
pride up here, because in Philly we have Grace Kelly, But, that's not a bad bragging point,
Right.
But you've got Jack Kennedy. And, they asked people just 2 years ago, who do they believe, this is a national poll, who do they believe should be on Mount Rushmore with Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt? And people say Kennedy, beating out Roosevelt and Reagan and all the other great figures of the 20th century. I think people think of him as more than a politician. They think of him as a hero. A guy who saved his crew in World War II, swimming for 4 miles and with this guy's life jacket, holding a guy by his teeth and his life jacket strap, and the guy's on his back, this 42-year-old guy, badly burnt. And Jack, even with his bad back, managed to haul the guy to safety and saving the rest of his crew and swimming from island to island looking for help. I mean, it's an amazing story of guts and commitment.
When you started writing the book, it was obviously you had said you write Kennedy and Nixon. When you think about the times when you were in the Peace Corps, and maybe the day of November 22nd, 1963.
I was in Holy Cross. I was a freshman over here in Worcester, Mass., and I was checking my mail, and somebody came up to me and said, Kennedy's just been shot. And I went over to my history class, and Jim Powers, who's still teaching there, actually got me. He said, you take a cut if you don't go to class today. You're only allowed 3 cuts this semester. And I went over to the basement of one of the dormitories, Carlin Hall, and I got in the basement, turned on the TV set, and watched Cronkite all afternoon. And that's what I did. I remember sitting there watching Cronkite. And I don't think anybody forgets. It was almost like yesterday morning. We all have the weirdest memories. You
Sure.
remember the weirdest things in our lives. They keep coming back to us, things of no consequence. For some reason, they get into your head. And this one makes a lot of sense, though, because the world before and after Kennedy being killed is so different. And, of course, the world before he came along in 56 and we all discovered him was different, too. Politics was boring. It was men in 3-piece suits, sort of stuffy guys, a lot of plain people, no charisma, no excitement to the game.
Color came into the
color.
world.
As I said, he colorized American political life, and And then after he was killed, there was this long period of gray kind of sadness in the country. I mean, I remember being at school and the Beatles coming in '64 on Ed Sullivan, and it was almost like a consolation the Beatles had come.
Yeah.
It's amazing because the Beatles came right after he was killed, and all the excitement of that, watching Ed Sullivan with the Beatles coming on, and all the local groups in Worcester, all the local kids who had Beatles-style bands, and but it was still dark. And then it was only in about '68 when McCarthy and G. McCarthy and Bobby ran that it came back alive again.
You know,
I'm so marked by those two guys, the Bobby and Jack, that I think there's another story there about Bobby who was so different than Jack, and the life he led, the loss of the run of the litter, not the big kid. You know, he's losing his hair. He was like, Bobby wasn't lucky like Jack. He just wasn't as lucky as Jack, and he was kind
of the last.
He didn't look like a movie star like Jack did, and he didn't have the beautiful. We had Ethel, but he didn't have this knockout sort of European style wife. And
right.
He he wasn't a prince. He was a regular guy, and I really find him a very interesting guy and gutsy guy like his brother.
As an Irish.
By the way, watching it's so interesting. This is something that people watch. You watch the national championship football game. Do you know that Jack Kennedy integrated the University of Alabama?
I didn't know.
Before that, he personally Bobby went down and with Katzenbach and got George Wallace is standing in the doorway of the University of Alabama, and the Crimson Tide. They were all white players. They were all white students, and he just said, "Enough of that! Enough of that!"
Wow.
And he also integrated the Washington Redskins. He said, "No stadium unless you let black players." Jack Kennedy did that.
By the way, originally from Boston, the Boston Redskins in the 30s.
Yeah, well, I didn't know that, but I'll tell you, the things he did, like integrating Ole Miss and personally sending the federal troops in. You know, those guys that were playing that game, like I said, would all be playing for Southern and Grambling.
Right.
I mean, it's just a fact.
Exactly.
I mean, not that I've been in one of those games, but it's when I was in the Peace Corps training. But they wouldn't be playing for LSU and Alabama. So he did that. I mean, there's just something that's radically changed. Not just blacks in sports, but blacks in college was what he did. You know, in the South.
The Irish story. As an Irish American in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
You know,
well, my mother would tell
fan.
me these stories, you know, about how before the war, they always called it the war before World War II, if you applied for a job working for the milk company as a working girl like my mom, if you wrote, they asked you your religion. In fact, she said if you would put down anything but one of the Protestant religions, you weren't getting the job. And you said Roman Catholic, forget about it. But even when we go to the shore, we always say go to the shore in Philly. It's about an hour away to Ocean City, New Jersey, which is near Atlantic City. We had a house there, and they right up until what was it, the late 50s, 60s when we were down there, you had to put your religion down if you wanted a job as a beach boy. And you don't think that was an interesting question? Yeah. It was interesting to the employers. Why would they want to know? And if you put Methodist down, you probably got the job. But why did they want to know that? Jewish or Catholic? They didn't want to know that. Sure. I figured it wasn't for a good reason. Then they finally, I remember they struck it off the application. They finally said, you don't have to say that, you know.
Look, I was born in '63. People who are younger than me, and this is a good history lesson, but you lived through it. How do you tell your kids about what it was like then, not only for Irish?
Well, I don't know because I didn't live it. I got it second generation, but everything changed in World War II for Catholics and Jewish people. A little less so, but basically it was unacceptable in polite circles to be, in any circles, to be anti-Catholic after World War II, and to be anti-Semitic in really polite circles. But that lingered a bit longer, clearly. And if we had brought blacks into combat in World War II and integrated units, it would have changed history. If Roosevelt had gone that far, maybe he couldn't do it. I was just reading this book by Doris Kearns, but maybe he couldn't do it. But if he had brought blacks in the military service fighting with white guys in World War II, the change for black America would have been so much more advanced, so much better than we wouldn't have had the turmoil of the 60s. And I mean, if Hubert Humphrey, who called for the end of states' rights in 48, I think it would have been much more advanced, better off. But we got it when we got it in '64. Now,
current day, President Obama, who was with Ted Kennedy before he died, the whole Kennedy family endorsed him, Maria Shriver.
Oh, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And not only them, but Ted Sorensen and Harris Wofford and people around him, Greg Craig, a lot of people around him.
Yeah.
around the Kennedy family endorsed him, and I made a big deal.
Passing the torch to an African American.
I think a lot of that came from Caroline's kids, from what I understand.
Interesting.
Her kids talked her into it.
That's happening a lot with a lot of Obama people.
I'm waiting to hear what. I haven't heard from her or her old boy, or the oldest boy, what they thought of the book yet either. So I haven't heard anything. I've heard some very good things from the Kennedy family, other Kennedy members, but I haven't heard from Caroline yet. I'm curious.
You had mentioned.
I'm very curious.
Yeah, I can imagine. What do you think Obama can gain from reading this?
Well, he can learn about asking people to do something. I think his big mistake as a president was we had the inaugural. Thousands of people on the mall, Washington Mall, a lot of excitement. Sent everybody home. Yeah. Did you hear what I said?
Yeah. No,
he sent every American home and said, "I'll do this."
Yeah.
And it's not the presidency is not about doing it yourself. It's about leading the American people. He should have immediately given us something to do. I mean, the Kennedys ask not what you can do for your country, what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country, is the essential thing. The Peace Corps, the moon program, the special forces, everything was about rooting for the country, getting involved emotionally in what we're doing. And he never got us involved. And I know now he's recruiting people to work in his campaign and everything, but that's not the same. People want to feel, you've got to find innovative, adventurous ways to get the American people. In World War II, there was a thing called the war effort. Yeah, and it was Rosie the Riveter, it was buying war bonds, selling war bonds if you're a movie star. It was all that wonderful participation, collecting metal, collecting newspapers, for scrap, all that good stuff. As long as you do that, the country feels involved and engaged and committed. The other thing is, I think he needed, he doesn't have political confederates. He hangs out with his old friends from Chicago, which is fine. Kennedy hung out with his friends. I'm not talking about friends. I'm talking about political confederates. He seems to be out there all alone. Who are his allies?
Yeah.
What I mean, I don't get it exactly. I don't get why he doesn't have allies.
Hillary took a lot of guff.
She came in, but what were you going to ask?
Well, I was going to ask you that back in healthcare, they Ira magazine, or they didn't want anybody involved, and you would have thought that Obama would have learned from the idea that you got to bring everybody involved, people from the outside.
Oh, that's true, and I just think it's a question of making his cabinet political. His cabinet acts like they're under the Hatch Act. I've never seen a cabinet that was non-political before. Yeah. I don't even know which senators are on his side. I never seen him come on the Sunday shows on Meet the Press or whatever and say, "I'm here for Obama, get off his back, these other guys are the bums." I mean, you don't hear any of that kind of basic political alliance anymore. And I don't get it, except he hasn't asked anybody to do it. He hasn't insisted that his... Right. Does he act like the head of the Democratic Party? Ever?
I don't think so. Chris
These are basic, this is blocking and tackling, and asking the American people to do things, rallying the people, and having political confederates are two bits of advice I'd give him. But it's his presidency. We're just pundits.
You're right. Chris Matthew, a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
A real
it's
pleasure.
An honor. Thank you.
No, thank you.